the original Audi e-tron, the first. Now since this car came out, Audi's already been really busy. They've given us the Sportback, kind of coupe-ish version, and the e-tron GT Saloon, which is basically a Porsche Taycan with a nose piercing. But Audi's family electric car story really begins with this car.
What is it? Prices kick off at 61 grand and promptly shoot into space. This e-tron launch edition was £85,000 when you could still buy it, but you can't because it's now sold out and been replaced by the Vorsprung edition, which ticks all the option boxes so you don't have to.
You know the drill by now. Soon there'll be Q4 e-tron, Q6 e-tron, maybe even an RS e-tron supercar. But in the meantime, we've got this Normcore quattro drive family SUV. Now this one is the e-tron 55, not the e-tron S. The S is quicker, but this is the smarter choice.
What does it look like?
Well, just look at it. It's classic Volkswagen Group SUV, isn't it? Huge light bar, a little bit of Bentley Bentayga in the rear haunch, and then just slap a great big fake grille on the front of it, because how else would your neighbours know that you've just bought a brand new Audi? It's a design specifically tailored not to frighten people who want a slice of the future, but really just love their Audis.
Where's the charging port?
Under this plastic wheelie bin lid, here's your charging cable. Now, depending on how fast your home wall box is, it's going to take somewhere between 9 and 13 hours to go from flat to a full charge. And if you're silly enough to charge this in the same socket you use to charge your smartphone, you're going to need 2 days. Best case scenario is you're going to live right near one of those 150 kilowatt rapid chargers. And then when the charging flap opens, you can go from 0 to 80% in just 20 minutes.
How roomy is it? Yep, it's roomy all right. Frankly, it feels pretty much like any other Audi SUV. Inside it's as dark as a Scandi noir crime drama, but it looks and it feels and smells expensive. And you can sit adults behind adults if you're the designated driver for the post-lockdown dinner party. However, the boot has a high loading sill and those angled pillars eat up space. You'll need an athletic dog to make it up into the boot, and for a 2.5-ton car that takes up so much room on the road, having 7 seats would just make it feel a bit less greedy. Will I get along with the tech?
Well, these are all the same screens that Audi fell in love with a few years ago, really. You've got this great big screen behind the steering wheel for all your driver information. This is your standard infotainment touchscreen. Not so sure about this second touchscreen down here that works all the heaters, but that's not the screen that annoys us in here the most.
What's the gimmick?
Goodbye Stone Age mirrors and hello cameras. Now Audi says that these are great for cutting wind resistance on this massive car, and they're probably right, but they seem to stick out a heck of a long way, and that's because they use the same mounts as a normal mirror. Now why have they done that? Well, it's because they're actually a £1,200 optional extra, and worse than that, we found that when you're driving at night or in the rain, it can get a little bit blurry. But worse than that is unlearning the habit you've had your entire life of checking the mirror by looking through the window. You just end up looking at a camera. Cameras for door mirrors probably are the future, but at the minute, they're at the same level that sat-nav was in the 90s. It's going to need some work.
How fast is it? Now remember, I'm going to drive this like you would, and you wouldn't want to wait around all day for optimal weather conditions. So, we've got 7 degrees Celsius outside. I do love an English summer's day. I've got my trusty little GPS stopwatch. Now this e-tron 55 has just over 400 brake horsepower, which still sounds like a lot even in 2021, but it weighs well over 2.5 tons, and that's too much whatever century you're in. So I'm expecting my breakfast to be safe. All I'm going to do is put the car in sport mode, which tells the motors I need full power. Here we go.
3, 2, 1, go.
Oh my goodness! No, it's not that fast, but hey, we're accelerating in a very sedate and linear way. It's quite pleasant. That's 85, 90, and 100. And I don't think you'd ever need a family SUV to accelerate faster than that. You might want it to, but then go and have a Cayenne Turbo or something, I don't know. Right, we'll slow her back down. Whoa, that's a lot of weight. We've come safely to a stop, and we see that we've done 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. That's 3/10 faster than Audi's own claims. And then 0 to 100 miles an hour in 13.9. I can't imagine needing a big, comfy Audi family bus to get me to 100 miles an hour in 14 seconds, but it's nice to know it can be done. The quarter mile went past in 14.2 seconds at, well, 100 miles an hour. So we crested the 100 just as we got through the quarter mile. So I take it back, e-tron, you're a quick enough car and you would take care of plenty of hot hatchbacks. Next test, please. What's it like on a motorway? Well, if there's one thing that Audi's been doing really well of late, besides lovely interiors and massive grills, it has to be quiet cars, doesn't it? Silent cars. All of the big bulldozers, the Q7, the Q8, and this e-tron, they're just so freakishly good at cutting through the air. I mean, this thing would be a gorgeous long-distance continent-crossing GT car if it had enough range to do that. But for a British motorway, I can't think of many cars I'd rather bumble up and down them in. It's just so untaxing. But what about a different sort of motorway? What about, say, das Autobahn? Hello and welcome. You join me in the natural home territory of the Audi SUV, the outside lane of a motorway. So that's a 115 mile an hour cruise. Very stable, still pretty quiet. But that sort of number isn't what scares me right now, and getting up to the top speed of just over 120 miles an hour, I'm not that excited about that either. Because as we come up to an indicated 120 miles an hour, the problem is my range meter, well, that's free falling. My miles per kilowatt hour has dropped off the bottom of the gauge. It's having a pretty catastrophic effect on all my readouts here, and yes, well done e-tron, you can sit at 120, no problem at all. You rule the outside lane, but I think we'd better save some charge for the next test. How big's the battery?
Under here is your 95 kilowatt hour battery. Now Audi will sell you an entry-level version that drops that down to 71 kilowatt hours, but then the claimed range is only 212 miles. What you want is this version that takes that back up to a claimed 249 miles. Now normal e-trons have one motor at the front and one at the rear. But if you're feeling expensive, you could have an e-tron S, and that adds another motor on the rear axle. It can do torque vectoring, it's very clever. It'll even trigger power slides, which no one's going to do in an Audi SUV. The other problem is having 3 motors empties your battery quicker.
What does it weigh?
Now this is a big old bus and we're not expecting it to be light, but let's see if that grille is made out of lead. Well, it was always going to be a whopper. Audi claims 2,490 kilos because the e-tron is based underneath on Audi's Q7. So it's always going to be heavier than a purebred electric car. But even so, this one's just come out at 2,589 kilograms. If you're buying one of these, I do hope you don't live on the other side of a weak bridge.
Is it comfy? Well, in the olden days, an Audi wearing 21-inch rims on a surface like this would have probably shattered the windscreen. But it seems they've just about started to learn their lesson. The e-tron is on air suspension and left in the auto setting, it's pretty good. It's a pretty comfortable car. What's weird is if you put it into comfort mode, it actually gets a bit too wallowy and sort of flops about. So comfort isn't as comfortable. And then stranger still, if you put the e-tron into dynamic mode, which used to be basically the skateboard setting, it's actually tolerable. You might even leave it in dynamic mode all the time if you are going full Audi driver. What's it like in a corner? Well, it's like any other Audi SUV really, electric or not. It's stable and stodgy and about as memorable as, what's that film? Are we gonna have to do any more cornering today, guys? What about if you're late for something? I mean, the e-tron does without the 48-volt anti-roll tech of stuff like the Bentley Bentayga or even Audi's own SQ7, but it still manages to control that enormous weight really rather well. And you get a real sense the car's working all four tyres. I mean, I'm never going to go so far as to say that this is enormously fun, and I'm very conscious that it's absolutely nuking my precious range. But the e-tron can do corners with a little bit of pace. So, what about range? Well, we began this morning with 100% charge and 201 miles on the clock. And after 67.6 miles of testing, we've got 57 miles left on the display. Oh dear, sounds terrible, doesn't it? Over 140 miles of range gone. But that just shows how much range totals can fluctuate depending on particularly your speed, the temperature, any other factor involved with your driving. At Top Gear, we've tested lots of different e-trons and found they normally do about 2.2, 2.4 miles per kilowatt hour and go around 180 to 200 miles on a charge in the real world. So that is what you ought to expect. What's the verdict? So the Audi e-tron is an unimaginative car. It doesn't stand out from a crowd. And that's completely deliberate from Audi, isn't it? They decided the role that this car is supposed to play in the great era of the electric car tipping point is not scaring people, not weirding you out. And that's why it's good at the things we've come to expect from a car like this. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it's beautifully made. The connectivity and the technology inside is spot on. There are, of course, things that we're not convinced by. These door, camera, mirror, selfie stick things need taking back to the drawing board for me. And there's no doubt that the e-tron should be going further between its recharges to make the most of just how refined it is at doing long distance. But there's no doubt that if you want an electric car that doesn't shout "future" really loud in your face or that of your neighbours, there's a lot to like here. And if you want the most easygoing, baby-proofed step into owning an electric car, you'll find a lot to like in the e-tron.